Pippa Nissen is a global architect and theatre designer with a client list that reads like a who's who, including the National Portrait Gallery, the Fitzwilliam Museum, the British Museum, amongst many others. A woman who publicly revealed that it took her until 40 years of age to genuinely believe she was working in the right space. I'm curious how her powerful revelation came about. Let's meet Pippa. Pippa, welcome to the Design Royalty podcast studio.
Thank you very much.
Have you come far?
Well, sort of up the road.
Up the road. Oh, very cool, very cool. Icebreaker time. Tell us something about you that we wouldn't imagine, we wouldn't associate with Pippa.
Well, I guess it's not really answering the question, which is what I do quite well. But this is a 3D scan. So I looked around at home trying to find something that would be sort of interesting. And actually, it's one of those questions, isn't it? If you could save something, if there was a fire in your flat and you could save one thing, it would be this, which is a scan of my children about 10 years ago, a 3D scan.
That makes sense, yeah. If it was just a plastic object.
Yeah, I mean, it's not particularly
children.
Beautiful, is it? Because it's quite crude, but actually I completely recognise them from the scan. And it's like this frozen moment in time when they were innocent and young, and now they're quite stroppy teenagers. So,
so you're a mum as well as a business owner?
I am, yes.
Which do you prefer?
They're quite similar, actually. I
No,
mean,
not the children.
Oh. No, I meant
actually,
having...
my son I prefer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, well, I actually meant being a business owner and having children is quite similar. Because,
how so?
Well, having a business,
Gorgeous.
It's like this sort of animal, this organic thing that changes and kind of grows, and it has a personality of its own. Sometimes you're really aligned with it, and at other moments it sort of gets carried away. So... yes, sort of difficult and brilliant at the same time.
What a lovely metaphor. And you work with your husband now, don't you?
I do, yeah.
How do you find that transition?
Well,
living and working now?
Well, we do. We sit completely on the other side of the office. So when he first joined, he came and sat next to me, and we just talked about, rubbish. So I said, you have to go the other side of the office. So we actually operate quite separately, but it's very joyful, actually, sharing. It's like a massive hobby that I share with him. And so we're, I guess, constantly talking about it and shaping it a bit like the third child.
Lovely. And is he a passion for design? How does his role work within your company?
So I guess sometimes we call me creative director and him technical director, but actually that's not quite true, because I also like the technical side and he likes the creative side, and he's very good at design. So he mainly runs the architecture projects, and I kind of gravitate towards the cultural projects. So I guess that's our division, but it's more fluid than that.
So I want to know about your career. So let's start with the seeds that were sown in your former life as a child, I guess. Were there any clues?
I guess I've always really enjoyed play and an idea of a kind of fantasy world. And I guess also it's the way that I learn about things that I find it really difficult to kind of read a page and take away the information. I need to be shown it, or I need to feel it in some way. So I think that's what I've ended up doing. It's about how I try and shape people's experiences so that ultimately they can emotionally feel a connection with an object, an artwork, or a space.
Lovely. And your parents, what careers were they involved in?
Well, my dad was a civil engineer. He's retired now, and he worked on kind of big projects. He's Danish, so he had lovely Danish objects around the house, and I guess there's that kind of Scandinavian aesthetic. I mean, he worked on big projects like the Øresund Bridge, which is between Sweden and Denmark. That was his last project. And my mum, she was a stay-at-home mum, but then trained later on as it's very niche. It's a slide librarian.
What does that
mean? For the Tate Gallery. Well, so it was when slides, so before computers existed, she would collect together all the slides that the Tate have, and then an artist would come and she would help shape their talks and their lectures. So actually, there's something about that has stuck, I think.
Well, I was just thinking, isn't it interesting that you were made familiar with these magnificent buildings, the Tate, for example, and the bridge you were talking about that your father designed, and then suddenly you're catapulted into this world where your clients, the British Museum, the National Portrait Gallery.
Well, I mean, I have to say, it's a privilege to work with all these amazing institutions, and really enjoyable.
How did this come about then? How do you obtain a client list?
So I guess it started, I'm trying to think, in maybe it was like 2008, 2009, when the V&A approached me as a theatre designer, and said they wanted me to design an exhibition. So,
but wait a second, okay, because the V&A approached you as why? Why?
Well, I guess I was doing, at the time, I had a kind of really split personality.
That's like saying, I'm standing on the street and George Clooney asked me out on a date. Oh yeah, that's just casual, that's just normal.
Well, so I guess I was working as an architect. So I had another practice with a friend from college, and we were doing more kind of straighter architecture. So I was doing kind of house extensions and more commercial architecture. But at the same time, I was working as a theatre designer, doing kind of quirky film projects for like Opera North, and working on stage shows. And then, so I had this kind of split personality where I was, with my architecture, I was working on kind of, say, smaller projects. And then with the theatre, I was kind of dreaming, and they didn't really meet. So I would kind of do them. I'd do like a 2-week project, and then I'd kind of work on another one. And so the V&A, who then approached me for the theatre design side, and then I started working on this project, which was Telling Tales, which was this amazing project.
And that was back in 2009?
So it was around then. And what was amazing about it is it completely sat between architecture and theatre.
It's almost like the dots had been connected.
And it was just this moment that, okay, right, this is what I want to do.
I got goosebumps. Tell me about the moment.
Well, I mean, it was just so fun. And a lot of the difficulty about working in theatre, because I had young children, so that these long moments of rehearsals where you have to go on site and it's very, very intensive, I found quite hard with young children. And then with architecture, the kind of work that I was working on, I found, I don't know, the sort of the phrasing, it took longer to do these projects. And so one, the commercial side I wasn't that interested in, and then one was really creative but practically quite different. And then exhibition came in the middle, where it was almost like the best bits of architecture and then the best bits of theatre all merged together. So that's when I then started Nissen Richards Studio. First of all, it was Pippa Nissen Studio, and then I invited my husband to come and join.
You are the boss.
Hey there! If you're enjoying this episode and want to hear more exciting and informative chats about design and architecture, then don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you. Anyway, back to the episode.
About your Telling Tales exhibition. Why did you
go back to the beginning?
Yeah, why did you love that so much?
So I guess it became like a theatre production, but for objects. So, and the objects were kind of really sort of fabulous. They were sort of pieces of furniture that were made by artists. So in themselves, they were really extraordinary. And I started thinking about it as these like 3 different spaces, and that each space had a particular kind of personality and character. And then these pieces of furniture sat on these stages like in a scene. And in a way, that's what exhibition design is. It's about bringing to life things that you think are kind of static, but actually they're kind of full of life, and you've just got to kind of stage them in the right way. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Who do you work with as part of your team?
Well, we've got a team of around 26, 27 people.
And on a project like that, what would be
Okay. So it's a combination of curators. There's conservation specialists to make sure that the objects are safe, that you light them in the right way. So lighting designer, video designer sometimes. Maybe there's specialists in like hardware. There's specialist contractors, graphic designers. So it's a really big team.
All under your umbrella, under your guidance?
So usually we have a whole load of subcontractors that sit under us, or sometimes it's just our team that's in-house. And then we work with these specialists that are based in the museum. It's really fun, I have to say.
So what is the design? What's the design process length of time from start to finish?
Well, sometimes we do these crazy projects that are like 2-3 months, but usually it's a year or so.
So crazy means that's quite a short...
It's really short, yeah. But then sometimes that's really fun. Like we worked on the Great Exhibition in the North a few years ago, where it was something like 4-5 months for this really complex project. So we ended up sort of working on it like it was a theatre production, but it was like a kind of invasion into a museum where there was this whole like, other language that started to kind of take over.
And what was the language?
Well, it was bright, and we covered up whole areas of the museum, and then we put other works of art. So it felt really exciting, I have to say, and really fresh, because it was like a kind of takeover. So the normal experience that everyone would get from this museum was like turned on its head.
Yeah,
and it was like a kind of fashion show of sort of new work, which felt really exciting.
And how do you come up with these ideas and concepts? What's your starting place?
So I think I really believe in the process. So I like to think that we start with this blank page, and then we have to go on this journey with the client. So we have to try and put as much on the table as possible, and then like really carefully start to bring things together until you get a gesture that kind of feels right. So it's like this huge mapping project that takes a while to get right. But so I'm the opposite of an artist, say, who would come in and say, okay, so we're talking about dinosaurs. Right, I see a desert, I see sun, and that's what we're going to do. It's like the opposite of that. We'd put everything on the table, and then we'd start to map it, and then through the mapping process, really slowly, we start to kind of see a vision that then kind of emerges.
And what are your tools of choice during this mapping process?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I need a space that I'm really comfortable with. So our space in our studio is a very important tool. So it's got blank walls that we gradually start filling. And then sometimes we work remotely. So it's something like a Miro board, which is, this infinite board on the computer, which can work a bit like a wall of our space, where we can start to kind of bring things together. And then really it's very basic. It's like a giant scrapbook that we start to, cut out pictures. We start to kind of group things together. We start to find words that start to explain things. And then it's a really complicated process of starting to put it into the computer and start to kind of create this shape, I'd like to say. So it's a bit like a piece of music or a play where there's a structure. In a play, 3/4 of the way through, something happens, it's a challenge that you have to overcome. There's like a bit at the beginning. There's maybe a really emotional bit about a third way through. It's those kind of things that we start to try and understand and create these moments within this kind of journey that the visitor's going to go on.
Are you a team player? Would your team suggest that you're a team player, or you like to work on your own?
So I have to say, I don't think I can work on my own. I have to be part of a team. So I really rely on people to come with their expertise too, and I really enjoy that. So I really like the conversation that we have.
And if one of your team was asked to describe you using 3 adjectives, what would they use? Oh dear.
Maybe, well, it depends. I guess I am definitely an optimist, because I'm always trying to find a way through something. So if there's ever a kind of brick wall, it's just about finding like another way to do it.
So optimist.
So maybe I'm an optimist. Maybe I can be enthusiastic. Oh, it's difficult giving yourself positive words. It feels
good training. Good training. Come on.
Well, then the opposite, thoughtful.
Thoughtful.
So I think it is really important to think carefully about how things go together.
Okay, so thoughtful, not in the sense I've bought you a Twix, you can share my Twix, but thinking things through.
Yes. Thinking things through.
Okay, good. Okay, so these brick walls, will you share some examples of situations where you have identified a challenge and have had to find a way around it?
I mean, I have to say, it happens on a mini way all the time.
Good. Learning.
So I can't think. I'm trying to think of a specific example. I guess usually it's about there's a reason why something can't happen, which is usually
mechanically.
Well, no, usually it's money or conservation. Like you can't put something in a particular situation because it will, I don't know, deteriorate, or it has to have barriers around it, or the light is too much light. Or money is always the thing. We have like big dreams and then there's a reality check moment. But I think what's really important is to get the essence of what you want to try and say. And then usually there's like loads of other ways you can say it. So, I don't know, we think of it like a big immersive video moment. And then actually it ends up being something much smaller, more intimate and stiller. And then I know it sounds like a bit of a cliche, but actually sometimes it's those simpler solutions that end up being more powerful because you're kind of clearer about how you're saying it.
On a range, if you were to look at the different experiences that people that are available for us to be a part of, would there be a pricing scale? So a videography compared to presentation of a product. Which is more expensive and which is the least expensive?
Well, for us, I guess the tools of our trade in cultural projects, usually video, tends to be more expensive. However, it is changing, which is amazing. I mean, for example, we worked at the V&A on a project called Revolution. It was about 1960s. And it was an experience where we worked with a sound designer who, so you wore headphones. And then as you went around the space, it kind of triggered music and sound effects. And so you'd go up to like a surface and a film would come on and then you'd hear the sound and then it would kind of turn to music. So at the time, that was, it was really expensive and technology was just emerging. Whereas now, already, a few years later, all of that is, the price has come down, the technology has become simpler. So I guess it's also thinking of ways in which you can kind of be on the cutting edge of these technologies. So quite often it's actually people working in theatre because they're working in a much more experimental way. And, you only see one vision. So things can kind of go up quite quickly and quite cheaply. And then they can kind of think on their feet and find these gestures quite quickly. So I really enjoy working with people who work in theatre so that we can take advantage of their playing around in the theatre context.
Who have you worked with? Who's notable that you've been inspired by?
Well, I love working with, we have consultants that we work with all the time. I really enjoy working with Frey. They're a video company.
Why?
Finn Ross, he works on sort of fabulous West End shows like Frozen and Harry Potter. And so they're kind of big moments of, video mapping across spaces that kind of create these dramatic moments. And I really enjoy the energy that he brings with his team of kind of thinking about it in a complete different way.
See, I'm always fascinated whenever I go to the West End, just to or if you go to New York, to Broadway, and you see these incredible kind of productions that are put on, and in any of the galleries around London, we're so lucky. And I'm also always thinking, I wonder how much this costs. And I wonder if there's, I'm curious as to the process, the starting place for a designer such as yourself when you're walking in an environment, an exhibition centre, a beautiful museum. What is the starting point for a budget?
Well, quite often we come with a budget attached to a project.
So you'll know how much something will cost.
So we'll know how much something costs.
Right.
However, through the process, sometimes they manage to find additional sponsors, or like little bits of it start to become sponsored, or they start to kind of get attached to kind of pots of money that have been designated from other areas. So sometimes it expands.
So I'm not familiar with this. So the sponsors, how are they involved?
Well, I mean, we're not really involved in that side of it, I have to say, but quite often in museums that they might be working with a kind of sponsor who might take on an element of it, or be kind of attached to a project. But I mean, really, that's the starting point, and that we're given a budget. So it is interesting because our budgets do vary so massively. We'll have multi-million-pound budgets, and then we'll have tiny little budgets. And I have to say, as a practice, we love working on both, because actually sometimes on the small projects, you can kind of experiment, you can have an idea, and you can kind of really push it. And quite often, which is also frustrating, is that it takes as long for a small project as it does for a big project.
Have you read this month's issue of Designer magazine yet? Available in digital and print editions, Designer magazine keeps you updated on the world of design and architecture. Get your free trade subscription today at designerarty.co.uk.
What would be, if someone was to say to you, any project in the world, we're happy for you to take the lead? What would be a dream project for you?
Oh, that's a nice question. So I think what we're working towards is the kind of architecture side of our practice and the visitor experience side, like merging. So we really love the projects where we get to work on both sides. So I guess it would be building a new museum or gallery, and then we fill it with the visitor experience side of it.
Lovely. Which country would you choose?
Oh. Well, I do love working in Scandinavia, I have to say. So there is something about my father's roots in Denmark. We're working a lot in Norway at the moment.
And also, you commented before we went live on the podcast, the Scandinavians tend to be happy.
Yes.
Culturally.
Yes. Also, it's just very enjoyable.
You like it, that vibe.
I really like that vibe. And for some reason it really kind of suits us as a practice, and they seem to like our methodologies, so it's a good fit.
How's travelling for you these days, in mind of sustainability and the carbon footprint?
So we try and, I guess, reduce down how much we travel, and it's amazing actually, particularly over lockdown, how much we managed to develop a process where we can work online, and actually it's very successful. I mean, actually, just before I got here, I was talking to a curator who was based in Berlin, and we had at the beginning of the call said, right, we're just going to have a 2-hour session now, and then at the end of the month, he was going to come over and we're going to go through it. And actually, it worked so well. He doesn't need to come over. We can actually do it remotely, which is amazing, isn't it, actually?
It is amazing, the advancements of technology.
Yes, which actually before lockdown, we couldn't have done that. So we developed this way of working with our international clients that actually has completely transformed the way that we work, which is great.
And sustainability in the exhibition and theatre space, how does it translate?
So it is something that's incredibly important for us to get right, and actually just think really creatively about how much something needs to be permanent, how we can really reuse things and make use of kind of things that are kind of local, and also we like to think of these kind of layers of design, that there might be something that's kind of changing all the time. It might be paper-based, that we somehow make it look like it's really permanent, to things that actually have a lifespan that are much longer. So it's kind of creating an experience that has these different parts that have different lifespans that can kind of sit together so that there's a little bit more flexibility, and so that you're not changing everything all the time, you're just changing little tiny parts of it.
Have we any examples in your space of where sustainability has been incorporated with design, in an exhibition or theatre space where they're doing it well already?
Well, I guess we work with clients. I'm trying to think. There's working with clients like the Wallace Collection, where we're working with like a couple of projects at a time, so that we're trying to reuse. So these are temporary exhibitions, so that it's not about, so that we're creating something that can be flexible and can be changed in a really simple way, so that it feels very different, but actually the build is kind of very similar or the same. Or thinking of, I guess the example with the paper is from one of the galleries we did at the British Museum, where we kind of created this kind of label holder that's on a light box. And so the curators can just print out the labels on paper, but we put it underneath into this holder, and it looks like it's, $1 million. But actually the technology is really simple. And can be changed kind of very easily.
Is there a product that you have witnessed yourself and you have just been dazzled by? And I used to work in TV and felt so privileged at the access that I was given to kind of, an area of the country, that I could see from a certain point where, the general public, were only allowed to see from another point of view. And we got access because we were the film crew. Have you ever seen a product and thought, oh my gosh, this is just because I do this job?
Well, I have to say, yes, that happens all the time. When it's like those pinch me moments that, like, I can't believe I'm, climbing a parapet of a castle to check out a view for like a potential extension that we're doing, or going behind the scenes at a gallery and seeing, amazing objects like up close. I remember when we worked on Wordsworth Museum in Grasmere, really early on, we were sitting around a table and having a meeting, and the curator said, yeah, this is Wordsworth's table. This is where he wrote one of his masterpieces. And we all were like, oh, wow.
What did you do?
That's amazing. Well, it's just like, I don't know, I smiled at my colleague across the table, and we thought, later on we said, that was quite nice, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's a pretty special moment. Yeah.
And then we also get to see like amazing artworks,
For example,
behind the scenes. We've just been working at the Monk Museum, and there was a moment where we went behind the scenes and saw some of the Monk paintings really close up, because they were being...
What was the difference seeing them close up?
Well, I mean, you see, so they don't have glass on them, so there's no reflections. You can see the textures. It's just the excitement as well, the kind of frisson of being really close. And it feels very intimate. And I guess that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to enable people to feel that excitement.
Wonderful. How do you feel about education, architecture and education?
Well, it's interesting. We teach as a studio. So I teach a unit at London Metropolitan University, which is really fun. So in fact, there are 4 women in the office, and we teach. And so they're 4th and 5th year students. So I really enjoy teaching, I have to say.
What do you enjoy about it?
So it's very good for us to also have kind of young minds who are kind of rethinking and challenging us. There's nothing like having to explain something from first principles to think, actually, is that right? And then, they'll surprise us with really exciting ideas. We base a lot of our projects on the work that we're doing in the office. So actually it's kind of really nice for us to kind of be challenged and kind of rethink things. But no, it's interesting in terms of education, and seeing my children grow up in a kind of, having I guess rethinking what it is to learn. And actually, I was thinking about this the other day, my mum had a very particular education. She went to Dartington Hall, which was an experimental school back in the 50s, where the children made up the rules, and you didn't have to go to any of the classes you didn't want to. So
fascinating. How
it
did
is
she unfold?
Well, I mean, I guess it was during the wartime, but she went when she was something like 4.5, and until she was 16.
Can you imagine a 4.5-year-old making up their own rules?
I know. I mean, it is extraordinary.
Chocolate all day.
So, well, she never, I don't think she got any formal qualifications, but, and she chose only to do art and biology, which is very niche. But she also, and perhaps this is where I get this idea about experiencing things, being able to kind of give people that direct contact with ideas, because I think that's come from my mum's education, actually, and this idea that it's not about classroom teaching, it's about finding ways to kind of access information.
And what would be some of your tips for accessing information in alternative ways other than using traditional education?
So I guess we talk about it in our studio about how we emotionally engage people. So let me think. It might be about coming into a space, and we're thinking very carefully about the lighting, the imagery that you're kind of going towards, the sounds, the atmosphere. So you're kind of creating an atmosphere that is conducive towards then some kind of getting information, and it sort of sets the scene, so that a bit like theatre, so that you can then kind of hear the words or you can kind of see the information. So it's about conjuring atmospheres.
And are you aware of all the That's a stupid question. You're clearly aware of all the senses and the effect that using all of the senses has on the overall consumer experience.
So that's something we're talking about a lot in our studio. And I think it's really important. So you might do something by sound, but to mirror it in another way. So you might mirror it in a kind of visual way, or, I don't know, using smells or using touch, so that actually you're combining these senses. So, I mean, I'm quite a visual person, and I need to see something visually rather than read labels. But other people prefer to read words or to hear something. So that's a kind of really amazing dance that we work with to try and bring all these senses together, really.
And is there kind of an algorithm to create the optimum theatrical or exhibition space experience?
Well, maybe there is, but we haven't found it yet.
But you know when someone walks out saying, "Oh my gosh, that was so good." Like, why? Why do we feel, "Oh my gosh, that was so good"?
I think it's just working very hard to try and find some kind of truth, and that's, I think, through just complex layering of information. So it's a bit like this process at the beginning where we're trying to bring as much together as possible and finding ways through it. So I guess it's slightly like the opposite of conceptual art, where it's like one idea and it's one gesture, whereas we're trying to find kind of complex ways in which you can read the same thing. So it means slightly different things to different people. And it can kind of, it's almost like your mind can kind of ricochet between ideas and associations and thoughts. Does that sort of make sense?
Totally makes sense. And it's interesting that you talk about being clear on your demographic. I was in Paris recently in a gallery, and I can't remember which gallery, and to access the information about the art was via a QR scan, and that for me just turns me off. I don't know if it's my age.
Yes.
Maybe it would appeal to younger people.
Yeah.
But for me and my partner, 100%, I am not interested in using my phone when I'm in that sort of environment.
I mean, interestingly, in lockdown, that's something that lots of museums used, because it was like a really simple technology that meant that you could kind of layer up the information. But yes, it's also not sophisticated enough now, is it? But there are lots of other technologies, that quite a lot in gaming. So, for example, using your phone and you sort of put it over something and then up pops information, it starts to kind of recognise shapes. And so I think there's something really exciting just around the corner, which will be using those kind of technologies. But perhaps we're not quite there yet, although there's some amazing things out there.
Like what?
Well, like kind of VR experiences where you're in a space and you kind of go on a journey, and you're actually, it's part of an experience with other people. But it involves big, headsets and things that you have to carry. So as the technology gets better, that'll all, become lighter and more mobile.
Microchip in our arm.
Yes.
So one of the many things that fascinated me about you was you shared that it was around when you were 40 years old that you suddenly had an aha moment. I am doing the right work, career, life for me. How did that come about? Because we're all seeking that, aren't we?
Yes, I mean, I guess it goes back to when I first started working in cultural projects. But yeah, it just took a long time. And I guess I was one of those people that I enjoy like the beginning of a project and creating something new. And I guess also having children when they were young, and I went back to work really, really quickly. But it was like, why am I here? I'm either here because I'm really engaged in what I'm doing, or actually, I shouldn't be here. So actually just doing things that I really enjoy. And it just took me ages. And also I guess it's quite niche because it doesn't fit into architecture. It doesn't really fit into theatre. You can't really study exhibition design. I mean, there are some courses, but actually it's something you kind of find through other routes, which is like I said, it just takes time. I keep saying that to my kids, don't worry if you don't know what you want to do, because you can find your own path. It just, it takes time.
And what for you was the indicator that you were in the right place? When you were around 40 years old, what led you to believe, actually, I'm doing the right thing. This is good for me.
So I guess it was a combination of that I really enjoyed it. I couldn't wait to get to work. I was really happy to carry on thinking about it in the evening. And just that excitement of, the new project and the new subject and the new kind of colleagues. Each project kind of, brought new challenges. But also I kind of weirdly was good at it in that people were listening to us, and we seemed to be operating in a slightly different place than other studios, which was quite nice as well. It's like, that there are not that many companies that work in this sphere, and we're all a little bit different, so it's not like anyone's identikit. So we sort of found our space.
Your
and then
niche.
and then we started being asked to work on international projects, and that was a moment of like, oh wow, maybe this is working.
Well, clearly it is working. So your design sector, predominantly theatre and the exhibition space, what happened during COVID?
Well, yes, it was a very difficult moment, I have to say, in that a lot of projects just stopped or were paused. But we were lucky in that we had projects that we could carry on working on. So the Courtauld Galleries, for example, we were working on as a really long project, and miraculously, we just carried on. We almost didn't break pace and just carried on, and we just adapted the way that we worked. So we started working online through Zoom and Miro, and sending things by post and duplicating it so that everyone could open it at a meeting. I guess we're also lucky in that we do lots of different kinds of projects. So we just slightly kind of shifted things around. But it was also a really nice moment of reflection, actually. When I say nice moment, obviously a really difficult moment of reflection, which slightly made us rethink what we were doing. And
how so?
Well, I guess also thinking again what we really enjoy, and thinking actually that's what we're going to do. So turning down projects that we don't want to do and really focusing on the ones that we do. And like weirdly, that does work, in that actually you end up just getting more of the ones that you want to do rather than the work drying up. So we're really busy now, which is lovely.
Good. And how do you find being a woman in the architectural sector?
Well, I guess historically, it was tricky in that I didn't think there were many kind of role models. However, what I really enjoy, like in our practice, is that I don't know, something like 60-70% women in our studio. I mean, not that that's, it's just happened by chance, but I do really enjoy strong women in our office having a voice, and also being able to support them having children and working. And there's just something very nice about working with lots of different, people as part of our practice. And I feel very strongly that women should be able to combine all parts of their life in their work. And, I loved it in lockdown, where you'd be talking to a client and, I don't know, their child would pop up or, you get this kind of glimpse into their home life. And actually there is something about a kind of humanity of sharing our lives as part of our work, which I really enjoy, and I try and foster, I guess, in our studio.
You mentioned when you had a little boy and a girl.
2 girls, actually.
2 girls. You mentioned when you had your children, you returned to work quite quickly.
Yes.
How did you? How was the mash of the children and the work? I'm not going to say balance. I hate it when people say, "Have you got a good work-life balance?" Well, what does that even mean? What was the experience like?
So I guess it was really fun sometimes and really hard at other times. And, I see it in people in our studio who've got children, and, they're balancing all the time these, different parts of their life. But they've definitely been part of the studio. They've travelled a lot. We've had holidays that coincided when we're photographing projects. So, our photographer that we use a lot has sort of been on family holidays with us, where we're going as a kind of, family to go and view things. And they've taken a real interest. So, I mean, I'm hoping that rubs off in some way, in that, they've got to create their own interests and really follow their dreams.
And what's the future of the exhibition space?
Well, it's a challenging time post-COVID in terms of budgets and funding, but it's also really exciting. It's like at the moment, I feel like it's the birth of a kind of new art form almost, with exhibitions, that challenges film and kind of art. And so it's a kind of moment, particularly with technology, I think, and how that can start to really blend into the experience in a bit more of a kind of seamless way. It feels very exciting.
Pippa, you're a pleasure, and keep flying the flag for these magnificent cultural experiences. Thank you. If you have enjoyed today's podcast as much as I have, please like and subscribe, and I'm going to be here every Monday with more fabulous guests. See you then.